Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk. Today's topic is Microsoft Sustainability Manager Implementation Checklist for Success. My name is Peggy, and I'll be your moderator today. We're broadcasting this session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you're agreeing to this experience. The recording will be available on the TechTalk Community Dynamics page within the coming weeks. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions during the session, and we'll have a live Q&A segment at the end. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Kody Wildfeuer, Senior Fast Track Solution Architect, and Cian O'Sullivan, Fast Track Solution Architect. Kody, over to you.
Thanks, Peggy. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, wherever you are. We are very excited, Cian and I, to talk through the sustainability, Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability, new product, super exciting. Helping businesses, partnering with businesses to really take their carbon and green initiatives forward and keep it on track, monitoring, keeping goals, keeping scorecards. So, we'll just dive right into it. All right, so just starting at a very high level. So setting expectations for this content, what we will cover today is a prerequisite checklist for success and a configuration checklist for success. And we want to slice it into these two steps. Just giving some background here. So, there is it's an exciting product. You can really dive right in, you can spin up a trial and all that good stuff. But there is some work up front, and we want to really present that out before you really dive in, before you start the project and get all excited and get going. And it will make the implementation that much smoother. So these are the two sections, and we will start with the prereqs. So looking at the overall goal and purpose of this content. So we have been in the trenches at Microsoft for building this content out. We are monitoring. We have our own goals for green initiatives like being carbon negative by 2030. So we really understand what it takes, and there are it's kind of a new greenfield industry compared to like say business sales and service, which is kind of our what we've been implementing on CRM and Dynamics in the past on the cloud. And we're really branching out into these industries and specializing, in this case, cloud for sustainability. And since it's so new, there is a lot of, question marks and gray areas and stuff that hasn't really been discovered yet. So just going through this content, we're looking to, give you a checklist to ask the questions up front, not only for yourself, but for your organization in general. And defining these items, it's going to really unify to make sure that there's no vagueness and you guys are not slowed down with having these conversations when you're already in build mode, and having delays because you need to go back and rework stuff because of the learnings that you've had. We're trying to really take those bruises away in the middle of the project and give them to you up front of the work that needs to be done. So diving in. So here is the prereq checklist for success. So at a high level, what we want to really emphasize, so you really want to start simple. So there's a ton of goals, a ton of metrics. You could do carbon, you could do electricity, water, there's all these different elements to measure. And all of the different ways, from like business travel to expense reports and, doing some calculations and estimations of what that outcome is for CO2 emissions. I mean, it can easily get overwhelming. And, when there is that overwhelming nature, that's when, you start to lose direction and focus and create, impact right away and not, a decade later. So this product is really focused on not only the long-term goals, but measuring the milestones along the way, right? So, people run marathons. I've never done that. I want to, but that's just a crazy intimidating goal for me. But if you use that as a comparison, like, there's marathon training programs where, you literally start like walking and then running a little bit, like a mile or two. And in like a 16-week program, you can actually run a marathon, something that if you look at as a whole starting off, it's crazy, but you can accomplish it if you take it step by step and focus on, the task at hand to build up to that otherwise super intimidating goal. So, and we're going to continue to focus in more and more, and this is very high level. So starting with your business as a whole, you need to ask why you have this, right? And this seems fundamental. This seems like, hey, I mean, of course we know why. But with green, I mean, with your specific industry, everyone is jumping in. Everyone needs to meet regulations. They need to get the ball rolling. And with that, with all the the different materials you can estimate, all the different ways you can track, right? You really need to focus on what is the most impact right away for your business. Like, so what can you deliver in 6 months that is going to make the most impact? So like, hey, we need to focus on tracking our carbon emissions for travel, right? Everything else we're going to say no to. This is what's going to happen first. We're going to take our learnings from that, and then we're going to build on it, right? So, we're going to crawl, we're going to walk, we're going to run. So again, having that focus, having that mindset, saying yes to the most important things, you can say no to everything else and continue to build on that. That's very important because it's a massive initiative. And setting expectations with the product. So, Microsoft has a great product. We've learned our lessons. We're streamlining what the processes need to be and the milestones and the measuring and hitting those goals. But that doesn't mean that the magic wand will make this just work for your organization as soon as you turn it on. There is stuff that needs to be done, and picture Christmas Day, you're unwrapping this gift. And it's, oh yeah, this is exciting. This looks good. There's some sample data, there's some tutorials and trials. And, that's just a starting point for showing, for a specific industry, energy, in this example, that's where the trial data is. But that's one situation. And what we want to emphasize is every business is unique. So we give you, the rails to, go down the journey. But everyone needs to meet their goals. They need to define their own goals. They need to measure their goals in a specific way for their specific business. Every business has different business processes, even if it's in the same industry. Every business is unique. Every business is a snowflake scenario. So we cannot really deliver the functionality that you need until you start talking through the quote unquote batteries that are needed to be inserted into this application for your business. And, we boiled that down into 10 steps, which we'll get into. So, those are the batteries that need to be inserted into the product. And that's when, you take the product, you take your business processes, you take, your goals and your initiatives, and together that's what maximizes the value of the product. Without the batteries, I mean, it's a nice toy that does not, looks nice, but it does not provide much value, right? So you need both of these things to make it work. So setting the stage before we get into the checklist. So again, these expectations up front, this will save a ton of time down the line when, you might have half of what's needed and it's like, okay, like we missed this. We don't know who this position is or who needs to do this work. So, having these 4 steps, it's, hey, gather your team. Just have a, from a leadership point of view, to who's maintaining the data, to who's looking at the reports, to who's sending the reports, all this, if your process is defined, that's great. But, for these green initiatives, this might be a whole new department, a whole new initiative. So all of that stuff needs to be figured out, from a startup point of view. It's not the defined stuff that your business has been doing. This is net new, and you need to build that structure so you can scale and be efficient. So, pretty straightforward. Understand what's involved. So have your why, have your focus, plan level of effort based on that, gather your team. Like I said, the whole, from bottom up of who's going to be doing this. If the janitor at the plant that you're monitoring, if he's submitting expenses, that might need to be considered based on your use case, right? Like that's a very pinpointed thing, but you get the idea of, from bottom to top, we need to figure this out and what we're tracking. And then, going back to the focus, you got to follow the steps, right? Don't get ahead of yourself. Don't, for an example, there's reporting in the system. It's like, okay, if you have flashy reports that does not have good data set up in the right way to be monitored and defined by goals, long-term and short-term, the report's useless. It might look nice. Power BI reports can look really flashy, but it's not actionable. It's not helping your business at all. It's just a colorful, nice, fluid report, which is not what we want. We want to have business impact here. So getting into the actual checklist. So, I think in the Wizard of Oz, it's follow the yellow brick road, follow the green brick road here. So really looking to, put you on track, hit these 10 steps at a high level, and then you're ready. You have your ticket to really start using the product. And it's probably hard to read right here. We'll actually break it down into every step and give some examples and flesh it out. But just to give you an overall view, 1 through 5, 6 through 10, that's what we're going to cover here. And I ask, this is kind of strange that we're going into story time for, Cloud for Sustainability. Story helps wrap up, the overall narrative, this long hour talk. We can have these vehicles, beginning and, to where we wrap all this up, and you can really share it with your organization and get them on the same page very quickly for what needs to be hit. So I ask, bring on your, your hat thinking, just we have some fictional stories, but it really drives the point home for what needs to happen, all the gates to be successful for your business. So, it might be fake, but it could still help along the way for hitting the checkpoints. So imagination is required for these next steps. And you might ask, it's like, okay, story time, what is this, kindergarten? But the way we need to look at this is we need to gauge it as a vehicle for what your business needs to do, right? So you need to go through this checkpoint, this checkpoint, this checkpoint, right? So look at it in that way. The thought process in general, right? You need to get your data sources defined. The same processes for every business. You can make it an assembly line once it's defined in this checkpoint. So you just need to morph it to your specific business needs. And then 2 examples, so one real world and one fictional. So we have, it's a simplified version of Microsoft's plan. I kind of mentioned 2030, we want to be carbon negative. So, we boil that down. There's massive initiatives, and, we could talk for hours and hours and days probably on what we're tracking and what we're trying to accomplish from a sustainability point of view. But we just used one single example to drive the point home from a real world, and then one fictional. And just a side note, for the real world, it's kind of made for TV. Like it's it's simplified. So if you go and try to track this stuff down, it's not completely true. It fits into a 1 hour talk. So just that asterisk. And then we want to, we didn't want to use one story. We just didn't want to use Microsoft's. We didn't want to use the fictional. So what the purpose of these 2 scenarios are, it's okay, I can see what the green fusion company is doing. I can see what the Microsoft company is doing. They're defining two different things. They're going in two different directions. One's using water, one's using, energy, through kilowatts, business expenses, they can go in different directions, but the questions you need to ask are the same. What are we measuring? Where are our data sources? That stuff. So having two examples, that kind of helps inform and kind of guide you. If it doesn't fit with one use case, you can see at least the questions that need to be answered for your business. So starting off, so this is the real fake company. So this is Green Fusion. So they're looking to start out, and their mission statement is wireless energy for all. And at their core, they are looking to measure and then go into meet the defined goals. So jumping into the business scenario. So I'll just paraphrase here. So they, set the stage by inventing a generator that can take, thermal energy from the Earth's core and, generate something that, it doesn't emit CO2 like the, like gas or carbon, other ways electricity is generated. And also the wise minds at this company, they have recently discovered a way to transmit electricity long distances wirelessly. So pretty cool, no wires needed, no infrastructure. You can turn on your light bulb if there's like a station 10 miles away. And this doesn't exist. If anyone wants to take this idea and run with it and make it real, go ahead, steal away. So its core mission, along with that, reduce its carbon footprint, and that fits with the technology, what it's trying to do, and they need to monitor, and they want to show the efficiency compared to burning fossil fuels. And they don't want to match it. They don't want to be a little bit better. They want to make it the most efficient. So the market has no choice but to buy this cheap energy. It's a no-brainer, right? From a cost point of view even. So they're going to use that reporting, use their technology to really gain market share in the energy business, along with having these sustainability goals as at the forefront. And talking about this, so some specific numbers, 2031, that's when they want to be carbon neutral, carbon negative by 2036. And again, these are the marathon steps. Looks super intimidating and like way in the future, but then also showing the progress along the way using core metrics. And they're investing resources. They want to have these reports out to consumers through 6 months, little targeted things here and there. So this is where it comes into the focus. They have these ambitious goals, but they're also defining what is realistic to start to measure and show to the community and its customers over the next 6 months. What's the impact of the most important part of what they're trying to do? And they're going to continue to build on this, continue to ramp up what they're doing in complexity. They're just going to start small and be successful and continue to grow with the product. Yep, and starting small, they call it out at the end, focusing on one use case. So going, through the green bricks here, stepping on one. So so what are the overarching goals? Are you wanting to be carbon negative? Are you looking to be carbon neutral or reduce and report, right? So that's just one example of answering the question, right? But this gets your idea of, hey, are we ready to offset our carbon? Are we looking to at this stage just measure and understand what our emissions are, because we don't even know that? Like, where is your business in terms of maturity for measuring and for sustainability? It might be we literally just picked this up yesterday. We're just like a regular business, and we want to help with the environment. So now we're doing this, but that's all we know, right? So you need to start at a level that makes sense for your business. A mom and pop shop, not having any knowledge or, not a ton of investment to, start off with like crazy goals of, carbon neutral by or carbon negative by next year or something. If it's not realistic, you're not going to hit it. So that's the first step. Making sure that it fits with your business, with the resources, with your employees' knowledge, with the structures in place, and with the experience. So step 2. So we want to, start to consider, it's like, okay, so what plants do we have? Like where does Green Fusion operate, or your business? What makes up our company, right? So do we have just purely manufacturing plants? Do we have corporate offices? Do we have business control? You start to lay out and structure like, hey, where are our emissions? Like who's using energy? Who's consuming stuff? Who's producing stuff? This is the first step. It's like, hey, we have all these plants in North America, South America, Europe. Like, hey, I mean, that's a lot of plants. Based on what our goal is on step 1, like maybe we should focus on 1 in North America, or maybe we should focus on the 21 in Asia, or 5 in Australia, right? Having that chip away, it's like, hey, you don't take on the whole world right away. You start with the greatest impact, start your structure, build small, and then scale it from there, right? Because scale in advancement, it's really doing the fundamentals at scale. So starting with those fundamentals is the most important. So 3, carbon intensity reporting cycle. So this is another, it's like, hey, at a vague level, it's like, hey, we need to report on what we're doing, right, as a company. Okay, what exactly does that mean? Are you going to report quarterly? Are you going to have like yearly reports? Are you going to have it bi-yearly? You need to understand that, and then make sure that when you define this, then that really informs the complexity. So diving back into step number 2, it's like, okay, we're going to do these 5 plants, and we're going to report quarterly or bi-yearly. It's like, okay, I mean, do we have data that is accurate and reportable? Or is there some kind of lag for, expenses and stuff from a financial point of view? And then we can't actually get that data to hit what we need for these reports, right? So again, you're stringing together the path. You need to step on all these bricks one at a time to make sure that, so say, you have the other steps in place, but then it's like, oh, this isn't going to work for what we need for reports. So another good thing to define. And so step number 4, and so by the way, I mean, we have this flashy product. I have not gone into the product at all. This is stuff before you even start kicking the tires of the product. And that's one of the things that we've seen from learnings. People get in and start configuring, and they learn about these steps 3 months into the project when they're building, right? So, sorry to disappoint if, it's like, oh, we want to see the product. This is the stuff that makes the product successful in the long run. So just setting that expectation, there's not going to be any demo or anything. It's the core fundamentals, and then, you get into the flashy stuff with the product. So what are the key indicators that you would report against? So again, I'm kind of mentioned this. It's like, hey, I mean, do we want to measure the plants, the corporate offices? Like, how can we do that? Do we have water bills that we can track at the corporate offices? Do we have electricity bills? Like, so, maybe we have satellite offices where, we're leasing out and we don't actually get information. We just get like a top line bill. So it's like, oh, we can't go that way, right? So again, having all this information, this is going to guide you down the path to the most impact. And if you don't have this, this is where you start to spin, right? It's, oh, we want to do business travel. Oh, well, we can't do that. Like, and we built it out for 2 weeks, 2 sprints. Now we're going back to the drawing board. So all of this stuff you want to define. And again, kind of, showing an example of gather your team. So, who is the leadership? Like, what are their roles? How motivated and in tune with this initiative for your project? You need to call all these out. You need to make sure that you know all the players, all the champions, who needs to make this move if there's blockers, because will be, this is all a lot of discovery, a lot of new. So there needs to be a lot of leadership to make hard calls on what needs to, what's said no to, so you can say yes to the right thing, right? So leadership's very important for staying on track. And then also thinking the overall structure, who's going to be looking at this data? Who's going to be, maintaining it? Who's going to look at the accuracy of the reports? Who's going to be presenting the reports? Is it the CFO in, the earnings calls? Or is it, the chief climate officer? Like, having those roles in place, it's going to make sure that, even if you're successful with a product, if you don't have this stuff, no one's going to read it. No one's going to know that it exists. It's going to sit in some back office. So, so that's, it's important to define the roles and responsibilities at the front. So also there's a ton of compliance and, standards that need to be solved. So you saw in a previous step of, hey, we have operations in all these different regions. So, okay, so if we're focusing on one plant in the United States, well, obviously the EPA needs to be involved. If we take, the 5 plants in the EU, okay, that needs to be involved. Or we're doing, multi-region, then all of those, EPA plus EU plus, maybe some Chinese emissions if you're working in Asia, and you actually need to, think of that as a whole, right? So not just one. If you're reporting data from your global industry, does that need to meet EU guidelines as well? Does that need to meet Chinese, even though you're monitoring stuff in the North America and it checks the box for EPA? All of this stuff needs to be considered to make sure it's compliant and accurate for your reporting in your different regions. And so, there's different libraries for, and this is kind of drilling into, those regulation compliance. So the specific rules of the EPA, IPCC, they're kind of just, it's an alphabet soup at this point, but drilling into those regulations along with what you defined of what your goals are, and then really focusing in like, hey, what do they have for CO2? Like what rules do we need to cover? Do we need to report at this certain time frame? Does this influence reporting? Does this influence monitoring? Are there some calculations that we need to make sure we cover for standardization, for reporting, for hitting certain compliance? All of this needs to be brought together. So what are the key emission sources? So, you kind of have an idea of, hey, this is going to be the most impactful. This is the structure. We're going to work on, the 5 plants in NA. It's like, okay, so that's great. We're going to measure CO2 and water. Well, like, how are you going to do that, right? Like, what tracking devices do you have at those plants that can give you that? Do you have IoT devices? Do you, what's the granular level? Or is it just, like I said, like a rolled up, this is the expense with all your expenses together for water, energy, and that stuff? Like, what is the level of granularity? And how does that work with what you need for a report? Is it delayed data? Is it in the right, is it actually unified? Like maybe it's in this plant, but not this plant. So that actually might reduce your scope of, hey, we need to move fast. We need to just have this standard process. This plant we invested in IoT, so that gives us a head start, and then that'll buy us time to build out IoT devices in the other plants to standardize and get those monitorings online, to build up from there. So all of this stuff needs to be considered. And I mean, what we've seen, not through no fault of their own, it's just a new business, new initiative, new things to monitor. I mean, people might start with, just steps 8 through 10, right? 8 through 9, that's what they have. And they're like, oh, we're going to figure this other stuff out later. But I mean, you really can't be successful at 8 unless you have the other steps thought out, right? And then that's the main thing, this content. We want to set expectations with your business to make sure you're not, wasting time doing stuff that doesn't make sense because you don't have all the information to make the most impactful choices. How are we doing on time? Okay, 30. So, and this kind of drills into it more. It's like, okay, So we know we have this this data for emissions at this plant. So we're going to focus on that. But like what data is involved? Like, okay, like this IoT device on this generator has this. This one has, telemetry that's in JSON. This one was like an MVP, but it's still outputting to Excel or SharePoint. And then there's like one access database back in the corner for whatever reason that, has some emissions data from the 70s, that, was like forgotten about, right? So all of this, to make this unified, this needs to come together, right? You can't just slam all these different data sources if they're measuring different things, if they're measuring for, using different calculations and estimations. All of this stuff needs to line up to make sure the reporting is valid, right? Otherwise, you're going to get, it's like, why does this plant look, so out of place? And you can think from like a conversion point of view. I think one of the Mars landers, like they didn't calculate, conversions for units. One was in kilometers, one was in miles, and they didn't do the unification, and then like we crash into, it's like the moon lander did not think what it was, because those calculations and those unifications did not work together. So again, kind of a more dramatic example, but kind of fits the use case of what needs to happen for these different data sources. And then 10's an easy one. Give you a little bonus. So if you have 1 through 9, great. You're ready to actually dig into the product. And I can glance through this a little bit. I want to save time for questions. Ton of content here, and just FYI, we'll share this deck out. The big TLDR is starting off those checklist items, right? So, we're getting into crazy amount of detail. I'm kind of going on and going into like, different scenarios that might be relevant to you or not. The takeaway is it's those 10 steps, right? So if you remember anything, if you take anything away, those slides, they're going to make you successful at the start of the project. So just let you know. So this is the more realistic example. So you can see different steps here, very ambitious. And you can see, carbon negative by 2030. That's the one that I'm focused on, but there's other goals. And, that should drive the point home of, hey, even these 3, like for this product, we're going to focus on this one use case. Because I mean, imagine going into all this stuff. It would be ridiculous. No one can hold it all in their mind. So focus is key. And, just going through the steps again, I won't kind of get into it, just different goals in a different way. So instead of reporting, like we actually have goals for being carbon negative and stuff like that. So, we're more buttoned up, more detailed in this way. And this should show, a more simple startup-y approach of like, hey, we're feeling our way, and cutting through, unknowns, right? And we're defining as we go, versus a more structured, like, hey, Microsoft has been looking at this for, the last decade or 20 years, right? So they're more buttoned up, they know what they need to have, and it's more structured so they can move a little bit faster. But they still need to have, the checklist just the same. So, they're defining it 3 months, okay. It'll be available on the company's website. It's published along financial earnings, so I kind of mentioned that. And then, just some overall rolling metrics. Key indicators, again, looks kind of familiar. It could be the same between the two, depending on the initiative, but depending on what region they're working in, EPA standards and stuff like that. So it could match up with the smaller, company, but again, you have to define. So leadership, defining out who's going to be doing what. So there's a chief environmental officer specifically at Microsoft, and his goal is to drive this home, right? So if there are any blockers with the product, if one of these steps, if there's surprises along the way, that person is really in charge of making sure this initiative moves forward, where the goals are being met short term, right? The markers along the marathon, and then also hitting and staying on track for the long term and communicating that to the company and also the public. And then all down through the list of making that whole thing work, down to, you know, the people monitoring the plants and maintaining the data. So EPA compliance. So again, this is just a vehicle, right? This is, I mean, Microsoft's global, but just giving you an idea, it's like, okay, EPA needs to be covered, Kyoto Protocol, Euro emission standards. You know, it's just kind of a different mix based on the green fusion example. And again, like, so, hey, you know, these are, you know, we did analysis for these different regions. It's like, okay, yeah, the factors are pretty standard. You know, EPA bring in the same rules, same stuff, same compliance. So, you know, we play nicely along with, you know, what Green Fusion did. So, you know, some of these do line up pretty standard, but you still need to have the conversations and definitions so you're not missing something along the way that's going to slow down the project or, you know, put it into risk. Yep. So, and again, you're kind of just defining where the data is coming from, receipts, office workers, you know, yada yada for monitoring. And again, like there's some standard data, you know, AS400, SQL, Dataverse. You know, where is the stuff that we need to, you know, what's the standard and how are we going to transform this to make it work together? And just, you know, kind of focusing back on a high level. So, you know, I like to compare it to, you know, I go into it a moonshot, right? Like this is this is not easy. A lot of these steps, you know, might scare you away. It's like, wow, we got a lot of stuff to do and we haven't even gotten into the product, right? And it should really show and convey it's, you know, this is not going to be an easy task. This is not going to be, you know, something you just press a button for. You know, this is hard, you know, but it's worth doing, right? It's worth being challenged. It's worth meeting the outcome. And, you know, similar to, you know, the moon landing. So, you know, JFK, that was his goal. You know, he set the initiative like 10 years prior. So, you know, setting those same expectations of, hey, you know, we're going to go into orbit. We're going to go like fly around the moon and not go to the moon, right? We're going to have all these milestones to hit that end goal of putting a man on the moon, right? Imagine just jumping to a man on the moon. I don't think that'd be very successful, right? So it's the same kind of process, the same amount of, you know, high level thinking of, you know, a major milestone, something that is unknown that you need to break through, that you need to solve a lot of problems for. And then just kind of going in. So I think this is just kind of funny. So it's like, oh, that, you know, that sounds kind of crazy for Green Fusion, Kody. You're going really far for that fictional story. And one of my heroes, so Nikola Tesla, just to give some background, you know, he really, you know, invented a ton of things, the electric generator and stuff like that. So he actually was invested in wireless energy. So he had one of his dreams was, you know, setting up these wireless transmitter plants. So this was one on the left-hand side, actually set up in New Jersey. And he actually had, I think in Colorado, he actually transmitted miles and miles and like actually ran a generator wirelessly, allegedly. I mean, I'm just looking this, you know, from history, but it's just fun to see, you know, stuff in the past where people, you know, dreamed, you know, thought of stuff, you know, hit it. It, you know, obviously didn't succeed, probably ahead of his time, but, you know, just seeing these things in the past to create wireless energy. And, you know, his main vision was free energy, right? You know, actually drawn from the planet. And again, very high level, but it's just a fun story of where he was, you know, trying to be sustainable and having that mindset way in the past. So kind of fun. And then, you know, checking it off, it's, you know, like the moon landing, you know, every generation has its own defining problem, and, you know, climate change is ours, right? This is a very hard problem to solve. It's going to take a lot of work by, you know, basically everyone on the planet to solve problems in their own way, to do things that, you know, make a difference. And I mean, this is the world's next moonshot, right? So instead of going to the moon, it's, you know, being sustainable, being efficient, you know, not pushing the climate over. So this is going to get pretty detailed, so I'll just glance over it. Like I said, you know, we're going to get into the nitty gritty now. So the checklist is the most important thing, and then, you know, I wouldn't even start looking at this, but this is just drilling down into that content even more. So, think of it like Inception, right? Like, okay, you got the 10, your work's not done. Now you need to even define it at a lower level, right? So, going through the solution scope, and this is where you start getting into the configuration, where you actually start cracking open the system and, setting stuff in different ways, like, hey, what is your ingestion? What is your organization, emissions factors? But you can move way faster when you have the checklist done, right? So, customer in progress, this is where it's like, oh, we're buttoned up for those 10, so we can move faster, right? We don't need to keep going back to the drawing board. We can have these discussions based on that framework to move forward, right? We have an MVP. We have some data that's, unified. We have a use case for, something that's targeted that we are confident we can deliver and not, take on too much. So again, some recommended practices. Again, I mentioned like units and conversions. The kilometers to miles conversion. That scenario and regulation requirements. Kind of went over this, but you get the idea. Just drilling into more defined examples. And overall, going through the process of, hey, we have these organizations, these facilities, this is the business org unit, here are the regional mappings, all this stuff. So, oh, we got a plant in Spirit Lake, Iowa, Huntsville, what are we going to do for this? How are we going to structure it? All this needs to be considered. And again, so just kind of going through defining organization. Obviously, Microsoft's global, so they got a lot more offices. But just defining this out, once you need this stuff, it's good to just be able to plug it in instead of going back to the drawing board, which I said. And again, so calling out like emissions factors libraries, are we working with electricity, gas, water, based on the checklist of success? You have an overall game plan to move in a specific direction. So you're more targeted instead of boiling the ocean, trying to solve your massive goal all at once, trying to launch a rocket to the moon and land a person on the moon in your first go. I mean, that's basically what you're doing if you don't have the items before. You can do it, but very, very, very hard. So emissions factors, again, so defining at a lower level and continuing to zoom in. It might seem repetitive, but you're just drilling into the content more and more, based off that foundational goal, which creates focus. So again, just different examples. Hey, we're doing CO2 every 6 months. We're going to offset emissions from corporate offices in this way, telling the story, setting the structure to where you can track and, actually make sense of what's going on and where you are in your milestones. And again, just drilling into more details here. So, hey, what can we measure? Flights, cars, from a travel expense point of view. People are reimbursing, like that's kind of a nice thing, but how can we make this fit for what we need from reporting, for our final goal, for our, more granular goals and scorecards? So just having these conversations based, again, that checklist. So I'm going to keep saying it, but you're going to keep going back to that checklist. So that should really show, if you don't have that checklist, you're going to, a lot of back and forth, instead of just, glancing back, seeing your North Star, your guiding thing to make you focus. You might have 3 or 4 of these, and I mean, you're seeing all these different steps, and it becomes so expensive and time intensive if you're not focused. And again, just a nice visual, like, hey, your sources at the plant, and then you have your overall reference data supporting this up. This is essential to be defined. And then kind of mention IoT devices. It's like, okay, we have that, we're good. We do not have that at this plant, so scratch that plant. Build stuff out where it can meet your goals in the meantime while you're still delivering impact from a 6-month time frame. So again, just defining, just chipping away instead of trying to run the marathon all at once. And the nitty gritty, like calculations. So it's like, oh, what's bad, what's good? How are we going to make this data, fit into a metric of, kilowatts, per CO2 emissions from our plant versus, coal and gas, energy consumed. All of this needs to be considered and thought through, and then also vetted against compliance and stuff. I mean, you can make up crazy, calculations, but if they don't make any sense and if they don't fit with what, government regulations are and, kind of standard practices within the industry, then again, it's kind of useless. And wanted to try this out. So hello, new feature for Teams. So this is a simple example for total CO2 emissions. So you can see in these calculations, so picture, you can go super complicated, which you'll see. So, blur your eyes a little bit for overall, don't try to make sense of it because you get into some crazy examples for calculations. But for a simple example, it's like, hey, we have an office electricity bill. We have a plant electricity bill. Okay, we're going to put that together. And then buy our grid mix. So, we're using 30% coal still for our electricity from the grid and the rest renewable or something like that. Getting that ratio, and then that shows the CO2 based on how much is generated from the different sources. So again, start small. And I mean, I'm going to get into some big ambitious calculations, right? And I said like blur your eyes, but just to show, solar on site, you're doing all these complex things to make it fit, to get the final output of CO2 and energy the same way, excuse me. So on-site hydropower, again, just showing different examples, whatever you're defined for your business, that, just focus on that. These are different, multiple scenarios. You might hit one of these on your first release. Like do something well instead of 3 things not well. So, and yeah, just glancing over just to make sure we have enough time for questions. So heating oil, on-site hydropower, you're seeing all these different scenarios which line up. Imperial gallons, liters, you're seeing the different calculations in place that needs to spit out the accurate outcome to measure. Because if you're not defining these and if these aren't accurate for translations, it's junk data. And then define reporting. So, all of those calculations, all of the sources, all of the hard work, it doesn't do anything if you don't have a nice roll up to, reports that are measuring this. If no one's communicating this, I mean, all this work is for, I mean, it's good, but, you're not showing the value. You're not showing the impact to the people that matter. Maybe the people investing in it, maybe your customers that, they'll continue to work with you because they're with these initiatives. I mean, if they're not seeing that, they can't be excited and understand your mission and goals and progress. And so, the reporting and stuff like that, that's to, think the marathon, right? It's this is where we're at, to our main goals, in a flashy, nice visual and stuff like that. But you also along the way, I mean, even if it's you're reporting quarterly, it's like, what does that mean? A snapshot of what progress is in between those, right? Between the mile markers. Are we on track? Do we need to make adjustments to meet our, goals for the quarter? In between and more granular, this is another aspect of the product that makes you stay on track in the short term, keeps that focus on you to drive impact. So along with the long term, you also need to focus on the short term. And just showing some examples. So discuss what your company needs for a report, right? Hey, we're doing water consumption. This is what we need to show. This is what we want to show the client. This is what we want to show on our financial statement. We're just going to keep putting this up. It's publicly available or something like that. Here's the needle. We're looking to move it. Picture, what speed you're going. Something very simple that's easily to digest to make all this complicated data coming worldwide. In one simple chart to see where you're at. And then, fitting the Microsoft example. So this is a nice visual from some content of, all the different initiatives. So again, like super focused, this is where you're starting off, start small. Like, there's 2 here. It's one's, you got 2 charts, maybe you're doing 1, right? And that's completely fine. If you can bite that off and get it done in 6 months, that's just fine, right? Don't take on too much. Don't try to do too 2 parallel paths and you get halfway done for both, right? You want to actually have an end result, an end product to show that impact. And yeah, so higher level, obviously there's a lot more going on, right? So instead of like, a water chart, it's, hey, here's how we're hitting carbon, water, waste, ecosystems, and all these smaller items to show. And there's a ton of data behind the scenes that roll up into this. But again, that reporting capability, that's kind of the end goal, to put it on the platter to show the impact to the wider audience, because it's a lot of investment, a lot of hard work. You need to get to the last mile. And so just setting expectations. So this is the first step. If you're Frodo, you're at the Shire, you're just taking your first step in this journey. Like this is going to be long term. You need to pace yourself. You need to be measured. It's exciting and new and fun, and there's ambition, and you want to move fast behind it. But you always need to take a step back and focus. And hopefully this guide, that's what we really want to achieve with it. It's, hey, do these 10 steps first before you dive in, before you get crazy with, different things and get excited and start demoing and showing to leadership, some trial data. Make sure it aligns with your goals. Your goals are the most important thing. And, go through the steps, get something very targeted, and then start to lay it into the product, right? Then start to insert the batteries into the actual application. That way you'll be the most successful, and it's still going to be tough, but at least you won't have the waste of going back and forth of, hey, we don't have step 5, so all this other work doesn't really make sense and it's off, so now we start over, right? Because we need to talk about step 5. So that's what we're looking to prevent for your projects, and hopefully this helps out. And so like I said, this will be available publicly, this deck, and we're actually publishing a blog post in more text form to get this out to you. And we're going to send this out to all of our customers that we engage with on sustainability, like day one when they're interested in it, to get them thinking the right, what they need to do, like day one, right? When they're, drinking their coffee and stuff. Hey, what do we need to be successful? What is our main goal? What's our why? And then defining that's the most important thing. So hopefully this helps you guys a lot. It helps us, we're scratching our own itch, helping inform customers and preparing them to make the projects more successful. And glad to scale this and share it with the wider audience. So finally, any questions? We got 8 minutes, 7 minutes. Any questions from the group?
So I'm just in the middle of responding to a question here, Kody, as well, but there's one that came in the chat earlier that I thought would be good to say for now. So the question is, what do we do if we don't have all of the items in the checklist already? Can we start anyways with building out our solution?
Yeah, and kind of emphasized, it's like, so you can, right? And there's projects that have, like, you just need to be aware that every step that you don't have is risk to rework and risk to delays down the line. Like you might be able to get, it's like, okay, we have steps 1 through 3, we're going to get going. I mean, that's fine, but the work might be in step 5, right? For your business, it's like, we haven't thought about this at all. So at least going through at a high level for all the steps, it's going to save you a lot of headache. And at least you'll be surprised at the beginning of the project before you're, throwing money at it in time, instead of halfway through when, you got people wondering when it's going to get done and they think you're on track, but, these new things come up and, they don't understand because they're not in the details, right? So that's what I would say. Anything to add, Cian?
No, I would completely agree. Again, like Kody mentioned, it's always tempting to kind of jump in and start get going, but we do provide a lot of guidance around this about making sure you have all your ducks in an order in advance. just because from what we have seen from experience, when people take on too much and spread themselves too thin, they do run into issues. So there is a lot of learning just in terms of the product itself, but also like the domain expertise that you will need when you're going after different types of emission sources. So it helps to kind of start small for sure. Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions?
There was another one that came in that was essentially around, is there a way to simulate or really, from what I understand, compare, say, a customer's real data directly against like industry averages? So think about, the different kinds of reporting structures that different countries will put in place, and the customers trying to understand how they compare to those industry averages and stuff like that, which we don't have out of the box today, but I have heard similar feedback. And essentially my response to that question, Kody, and do build upon this, was we'd be happy to kind of engage further with the customer to understand what these are like, because there are, of course, a lot of different industry standards that you compare against. And it would just be about, what are the priority ones? How would we go about making this available out of the box? But yeah, do you have any other thoughts on that, Kody?
Yeah, and just to add to that, so I want to emphasize, we didn't open up the product at all, and we really want your use case. That's what we care about. And I mean, if the product doesn't support that, like, we want to know. Like, this is a new product. Like, we talk with the product team, and it's like, hey, this is what the customer needs. So don't try to fit, into the product. I mean, obviously, try to standardize your data and that stuff, but that's where your defined use case and your why, that's the most important thing. So don't worry about what fits in the product. I mean, again, obviously you want to try, but if there's stuff that you need to do, we need to have a conversation of, hey, this feature doesn't exist and this is not, serving our why. We need to evolve with the customer needs. So that's what I would add to that.
Yeah, and just as a more generic response to that particular question as well, there are ways that, of course, if you had this data at hand, this industry generic data, you can, of course, ingest it, and we'll be providing capabilities down the road that'll make it very easy for you to, bring in, non-standard emissions data or non-standard kind of sustainability data or other types of data that you might want to use in these reports to customize them. So if you have that data, it's something that you could bring in, but it's more about maybe for the purpose of this question, how do we make that easier for you to do for this particular use case? So we're happy to have the conversation around that as well.
Yep, and to add to that, so yeah, I mean, it would be good to, so the defined, like, hey, what are we trying to do? Like, hey, we're doing kilowatts, right? So, CO2 emissions. I would get your goal first and then start to look at the industry, then start to look at data sources, then start to look at where, the regional compliance is to stay targeted. Because, I mean, you can get lost in the weeds and lost in the noise of, trying to find out all the stuff, right? You're ambitious, and it's like, hey, we're doing gas, we're doing water, we're doing CO2, and then you're spread thin, and then nothing gets done, right? So again, I would say use that focus, and yeah, then pinpoint, start asking the questions based off of what your specific use case is and impact that you're looking to deliver. Then start to pinpoint and target, and that's how you move faster. If you're going to move fast, that's how you're going to do it. Focus and always ask the questions and find the information that's out there based off your specific use case.
Okay, good stuff. So there's a few more specific product related questions coming in. I don't think we'll have time to answer them all, but I'll float a few of these your way, Kody. And again, please do reach out to ourselves and we can kind of go deeper on these. But the first question here anyway is how can we guard data quality that comes in via the data connectors? So that we might need more specific scenarios around, but it sounds like something that we're looking to solve for, which is, if you have data coming in that's of potentially poor quality, or, data that's changing over time due to stuff that's happening in the source systems that, you may or may not want to reflect directly within Cloud for Sustainability. We do have plans around kind of anomaly detection and stuff like that to detect essentially if stuff is changing in ways that you wouldn't expect to. Again, we can't really share concrete roadmap deadlines around that because they're not committed to yet. But it is something that we're looking at if I'm understanding your question correctly. But yeah, Kody, do you have anything else to add to that one?
Yeah, and I mean, data is messy, right? So I sound like a broken record, but focus on the targeted use case that you're looking to address at first. Minimum viable product over your 6-month release or 3 months. Look at the data. Look at how clean it is. I mean, that might take your adjustment of what you do first. It's like, oh, this plant has super clean data. Like, let's just bring that in. It's in a nice CSV format, very cleansed, exactly what we need. Versus looking at a source that it's like your why of like monitoring against 2, and it adds a ton of complexity because, hey, this is clean, this is not, we need to unify it. That's a project in itself. We need to transform this data, we need to fix it, then we need to bring it together, and that's gonna like be the large majority of the work. Like, that's a 6-month project by itself. It's like, okay, we're not gonna meet our why for our first release, so let's focus on the stuff that does work well, or that's an easy translation into what the system needs based off your use case, and then go from there. So again, pinpoint so you don't get overwhelmed by the complexity, because at every step you can just get lost in the noise. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, for sure. So 2 more questions. I'll try to answer one of them quite quickly, and then I'll leave I'll open the second one to you, Kody. So one was, will EU standards be included in the future, or should we import them during implementation next to the EPA? So again, yes, those other kind of reporting standards that exist is of course something that we are aiming to solve for out of the box. But again, I can't provide dates as of today. So again, maybe a way to think about this is, how far along are you in this effort that it makes sense to try bring them in on your own? That's definitely something you can do, and I think we can provide guidance as to do that. But we can probably have a more detailed conversation if you want to reach out to myself and Kody directly, or maybe via the feedback link that Peggy will share, and we can have a conversation about, depending on your timelines, which makes more sense to do, try to do it yourself or wait for us to provide those capabilities. So yeah, do reach out to us on that one. And then the last question is, will a report with the dashboards in Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability will roll out in the system in the future? Is this on the roadmap? So if I'm understanding that properly, we do have some existing reports, based off of the emissions that are generated from your use of Azure and M365 that are kind of separate to the Microsoft Sustainability Manager. There isn't concrete plans on bringing those directly within Microsoft Sustainability Manager today. They're kind of segregated solutions. Again, it is on the roadmap, but no strict deadlines. But yeah, maybe again, clarify that question with us if we're not understanding that properly, because there is the emissions impact dashboards that exist today, which might be what you're referring to there. Yep. I don't know, Kody, is that how you kind of interpret that question as well?
Yeah. So there are emissions dashboards and stuff like that out of the box, but again, it really depends on what you need to do with the system, right? It might fit in perfectly. I mean, that'd be great, right? That's a lot of saved time, but based on your why, based on what you need to do, where your focus is, if it doesn't, then you need to start having the conversation of, how do we report, right? How do we get the report that we need? And then you start having the conversation of, can we tweak it? Can we customize? Do we need to build our own report, right? And you got the Power BI skills. So again, not trying to fit in, exactly, because your business is unique, driving the conversation based on making sure we meet that initial use case of, achieving something in 6 months or 3 months that is well defined.
Yeah, and again, sorry, I'll hand it over to Peggy after this, but if it's specifically to do with the Azure's emissions impact dashboards, again, yeah, they are on the roadmap to become more native to the Microsoft Sustainability Manager, and there are workarounds that you can use to natively embed those within like Power Apps and stuff like that, which is what Microsoft Sustainability Manager is based on. So that is another option as well. But again, feel free to reach out to us and we can kind of clarify our understanding there. And over to you, Peggy, I think.
Yes. All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Kody. Thank you so much, Cian. If the attendees could have a link in the Q&A panel, I've posted a link to a short survey. We'd love your feedback on today's session and hear what you'd like to see in future events. So thank you for your participation there. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the TechTalk Community Dynamics page within the coming weeks. Big thank you to our presenters today and our audience for joining. Have a great day or evening wherever you are.
Thanks, everyone.